Thank you very much for joining. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm Azhar Yusuf, and I'm going to be your host for this today's lightning talk. So essentially, we have our first lightning talk of this series where we are going to go get you through an orientation of why we are doing this, what we try to achieve through these kind of efforts and stuff like that. And so this is not a really technical talk. So if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to just, put them in the chat or directly ask them. Uh, so yeah, without further ado, let's jump right into it. So a little bit about Tintash before we talk about our talk today. So Tintash is an emerging tech services firm led by Stanford alumni. So every time there's a new technology, we try to get on board. We try to train our engineers. We try to understand how we can best leverage that. And this is something that we find super exciting and fulfilling. We also have like a global team of experts, developers, and designers, and we have 4 specialized studios, and a Web3 studio is one of those studios. Uh, and some highlights of what we have achieved so far is that we have 15 years of experience. We have delivered 500 plus projects. We have worked with 9 unicorns, actually 10 unicorns, and three Fortune 500 companies. And I would love this opportunity to quickly introduce myself as well. So I'm a people's person. I work in close proximity with some of the best talent in the world, and I absolutely love that. I have spent so far 13 years in the tech industry. I started my job as a fresh grad at Tintash, and since then I have worked as in different roles, like in development, and then moving on to management, and now I work in sales and strategy and manage a team. So far, I have personally got an opportunity to work with 5 plus unicorns in this space in Web3. And what I really loved about is that I actually got to change perceptions about Pakistan, which brings me to my goal in life. And I think now my goal is to make sure that I can utilize the platform that I have at Tintash to put Pakistan on the blockchain map of the world. And that's something that I really look up to doing in my life. So some people may ask, like, how do you come across such goals? How do you decide what you want to achieve with your life? And I found this Japanese concept of ikigai like super interesting, and I often talk about it. So there can be like a separate discussion where we talk about ikigai and how it affects life and everything. But if you look at this diagram, you can understand that it is at the intersection of everything like that can matter in anyone's life. So what you love, what the world needs, what you can be paid for, what you are good at. When you put these in a Venn diagram and you get the intersection of all of these 4 circles, you get Ikigai. So my Ikigai now is to make sure that I can highlight the potential that Pakistan has. And so far I have gotten like excellent, a success in doing that, but I just want to, amplify that and work together with the local community to make sure that we achieve that on a bigger level. So, like I mentioned earlier, today's talk is more about just orientation. We are not going to deep dive into any of the technical discussions today. I just want to make sure that we set up some sort of a framework of how we are going to run the talks, how we are going to make a change before we actually start and diving deep into technical discussions. So, we will discuss some challenges that we face, that everyone faces when they transition from Web 2 to Web 3, and how we overcame those. We will also talk about how there are some transferable skill sets in the tech industry and how they are like super useful, regardless of which part of the tech sector you are in. At the same time, we will also talk about what we will cover in the future talks, with the technical topics that we are most interested in. And I also want to highlight what you should not expect from this series of technical discussions and lightning talks. We will also look at some industry convergence and validation based on our insights for the past 5 years. And then we will also look into next steps in Q&A. So starting with the challenges, we do understand that there's like a solid learning curve when it comes to Web3. It's not as simple as learning another framework. So if you are in Merl, you can't just learn Golang, you can't just learn Rust, and it's not like as simple as just learning another tool or another framework. There's like a change in how you perceive things, how you design things, how you implement things. And that's why we feel like this talk is important. There's also like a huge terminology overload. So when you start looking into AI, when you start looking into blockchain, you realize that like there's like so much jargon that you have to go through, and you find it sometimes kind of overbearing. And there's a sensory overload of so many new terminologies. There's also this problem of finding quality resources of learning. Sometimes there are like so many resources for learning that it is very hard to find the right resources and the ones which are like most tailored for you. So this is another thing that we will try to cover through our talks. There's also a first project paralysis. So where do you start? How you start getting into the field? How you start coding? How do you get your hands dirty with the code? Um, so yeah, so based on these challenges, we decided that we will start this series of lightning talks, and we will start imparting our knowledge on how we overcame these challenges. Um, we figured out that these challenges exist because transitioning to Web3 or blockchain is much more theoretical than one can imagine. So there's a lot of theory that you need to go through, a lot of documentation that you need to read, a lot of white papers before you can start feeling like it. Um, and in this kind of thing, the progression is the key thing. So sometimes you take a course and you really, really like it. And some other times you take another course and you are like, why doesn't it make any sense? Like, why is it not connected properly? And the key thing behind that is progression. So if you take a course that is designed by Google, you will instantly feel how the progression is working there. And this is something we look up to doing in our series of hacking talks. And we also want to develop deeper understanding of everything, of the underlying technologies, instead of just randomly using buzzwords. So instead of constantly talking about NFTs and ERC20s and consensus and stuff like that, we will focus more on the underlying concepts which make NFTs and ERC20s and all of that stuff. So we will focus more on the underlying technology. And we feel like that when you have a theoretical understanding that you need to develop, it is better to do that in a social setting. It is better to have a community around you and to bounce off ideas, to communicate with each other, to understand what other people understand, and piggyback on their understanding, and also kind of layer your understanding on top of that. So we will also look into that. So based on the challenges that I talked about earlier, and based on our experience in the past 5 years, we came across some solutions. So for the learning curve, we really look into a community setting, group discussions, learning from others. So whenever someone was transitioning in our team from Web2 to Web3, we would definitely make sure that they have a mentor they can go out to. There's a group, a cohort running together, and people can bounce off ideas, ask each other, like, I understand this from this particular statement. Does this make the same sense to you? Or is this something that you understand differently? Similarly, the terminology overload can be, mitigated by focusing more on the concepts and not the buzzwords. And I talked about it a bit earlier. Finding quality resources of learning is something that we looked into, and then we curated our own learning paths. And we looked into, like, we want to learn this particular topic from this particular resource, but this topic is explained better by this resource. So instead of creating our own resources, instead of creating, like, reinventing the wheel, what we did was like curate the learning paths, look into each of them and see what's best in which path, and utilize that, piggyback on that. And for the first project paralysis, we usually have some sample projects that we have tested with the people, that people have tried doing, and they have learned a lot from those. And we really like how this really progresses. And we essentially allow or suggest people to start with a hybrid project. So instead of starting their first Web3 project as a smart contract, maybe look into indexing a blockchain or a testnet, or maybe indexing some transactions and stuff like that. So now talking about the transferable skill set, and the reason we are focusing so much on the Web2 engineers to transition into Web3 is because we have found in our experience that the transferable skill set is the most important thing in any field. So you may look at some people and you feel like, oh, they are super excellent in this particular area, but they probably can't really work in a different field. But sometimes those people, those experts, have a transferable skill set that they can leverage wherever they go. So you may have heard of some people who start their career as engineer, but then they become medical doctors, and then they go to maybe armed forces and they do something else after that. This is because they have a transferable skill set, and this is like a very, very important thing, which we not focus too much about or don't talk about so much. So in this scenario, we feel like that a lot of the technology, a lot of the skill set that is required for Web3 already exists with a lot of Web2 engineers, and it's almost 80% there, right? So it's not like you have to reinvent the wheel. It's not like you have to forget everything that you are doing. It's actually layering on top of what you already understand. So all the different technology stacks that you have worked with. So if you have worked with cloud, if you have DevOps, you do backend development. If you do architectures, you use third-party services, you design APIs. All of that can be transitioned or ported into Web3 because this is all transferable skill set. And this is like super, super helpful when you transition into Web3. Same goes for the front end development. Um, and So the 20% that's like new or worth learning, these are like very fundamental things and they make 80% difference. So this is also something that we should focus on. So the fundamentals of what is decentralization, how things actually get decentralized, and started thinking into uh, segmenting different parts of like logic or system into different sections, or thinking of like different smaller settings. So I think we will dive deeper into this and try to understand this. But at the same time, learning more about public-private key pairs as well as cryptography and understanding how cryptography works, what value it provides. Then learning a bit about what are smart contracts. At a very high level, you can think of smart contracts as Lambda functions. But if you do take a deeper dive, you can understand how they interact with your code and how you work with them. Um, and then changing the way you think about certain problems. So currently, if you think about centralized resources or a single server doing everything, you have to have a paradigm shift in your thinking, and you may have to start thinking about systems in a distributed manner. So there are like different machines doing different things, and together they form a network that does wonders. And then you have to learn some technology stuff like nodes, transaction fees, and then some buzzwords as well, like consensus taking, DeFi deepen. But the way we are thinking or planning this is to make this as progressive as possible, so there is not a sensory overload or a technology overload, terminology overload as well. And I just want to make sure that I also make this super clear that this series is not about crypto trading or investment. We are absolutely not going to give you any investment advice, not suggest you which NFTs to buy, which tokens to buy in Binance and stuff like that. This is something that we actually try to make sure that we separate ourselves from as much as possible. We are here for the technology and we are very, very focused on engineering and not the finance of those things. So now, like the question could be, why should anyone transition from Web 2 to Web 3, right? So we have seen this over the past, and we have seen with our experience that software as a service is dying due to lack of VC funding. So if you look at the figures from 2022, 2023, and now you look at the VC funding figures, you will be surprised to find out that the startups which are not leveraging AI have absolutely died. There is absolutely no funding for startups if they don't leverage AI. And this has hugely impacted the overall Web2 market, where there were like repetitive fitness applications or mobility applications and solutions, stuff like that. That kind of business is not getting any funding anymore. And we are also seeing this trend of AI and Web3 getting a convergence. So there are like a lot of major companies in the AI space which are also kind of leading this Web3 space. They are launching their own tokens when they have to raise funding. So they are not going to the regular VC route. There are companies which have raised over $1 billion, a billion with like three zeros, sorry, nine zeros. And they have done that in a week's time by just launching their own token and building a solid technology around it. And they have just bypassed the whole VC funding thing. We have also seen payment system evolutions. We are looking at stable coins getting mainstream. We are looking at USDC, USDT, and a lot of other payment stable coins getting mainstream across the board, across the world. We are also looking at decentralized infrastructure growth. But the most important thing that I want to highlight today is the demand versus supply gap, because everyone that I'm addressing today, I expect are engineers in the Web2 space. And I really want to highlight the opportunity side of things. So I really want you to think of this as by sharing with you an example. So we got like three JDs from our partners, and they were looking for people to hire. So there was this blockchain GD, which has like a lot of technology stuff going on. It has like a lot of different buzzwords, which a lot of people are not really, don't have access to or haven't worked with. Then we have this backend JD, which looks like fine. It just has this blockchain integration of Web3.js, Ether.js. And we also found this, oops, we also got this front end JD. And it was also like similar, but it had blockchain integration part to it. So any guesses by anyone, like which kind of people were the hardest to find in these three JDs? You can just unmute yourself and just share if you want. You can maybe just type in the chat. So, no, Bilal. So blockchain was not the hardest to find. Anyone else? Okay, so yeah, thank you for Bilal for chiming in. Ali Hassan, backend. Yeah, so Ali Hassan is actually right. The backend folks were the hardest to find. The reason is, and this is not like a very interesting reason, but this is like a reason that has happened. Finding solid backend engineers who also understand how to integrate with the blockchain has been like the holy grail in the overall talent acquisition and finding and headhunting business. So people have like real problem hiring those backend engineers who are like solid backend engineers. They have extensive experience of scaling applications, creating excellent like serverless or maybe different architectures. But they can also work with blockchain and they fully understand how blockchains work, how they can ingest data from blockchains, and how they can eventually publish data to blockchains. So in this particular scenario, we were able to get like maybe like dozens of CVs or JDs for blockchain. We were able to do maybe hundreds for front end, but for backend it was like less than a dozen. And still, it was like very hard to find those people who were like solid backend engineers. People had some Web3 enthusiast experience, but they didn't have solid backend experience, and that's why we really want to focus on onboarding people from Web2 with solid experience in their relative technology over to Web3. So yeah, now I just want to move over to the Q&A quickly. So just a quick next steps for the Web2 developers. I highly encourage that you guys start looking into wallets, what are wallets, how you can work with them, how you can create a wallet by installing one and look at how they really work. And you can find like tons of YouTube videos, but this is where you start. And this is where we are also going to start with a lot of people. Uh, then also look into reading the blockchain data, maybe parsing it, doing some ETL. So you look into blocks, you look into transactions and addresses. You have this open source data that you can just ingest. Maybe look into that. Then what I highly recommend is joining some Web3 developer communities. So one thing that is super interesting about Web3 and that I also learned like really with like a lot of uh, kicks along the way, that was that Web3 is driven by communities, whether it is developers, whether it is marketing, whether it is anything else, even products. So there are like very strong community oriented models built around Web3. And if you really want to get into this field, you need to get out of your comfort zone, join some communities on Discord, start talking to people there, get engaged there. Don't take their investment advice. That's I just want to make sure you keep that with you, but do learn from them and understand how Web3 really works, and also like participate in future talks in this series. And we are going to look into doing a future sessions where we talk about some deeper dives and deeper topics. So the next session that we want to hold is about encryption. So this is like the very basics of the overall crypto and blockchain and everything. And this is how we got started. So yeah, absolutely. Let me just come to your question, Arshad. So the next session is about encryption. It is on May 9th. Since next week we have a public holiday, so it is very hard to kind of bundle that into that. At the same time, we have a LinkedIn group. It's a private group, and we just want to make it as keep it as professional as possible and keep as much investment advices and crypto rug pulls away from it as possible. And I'll maybe Michelle will share the link in the chat as well. And if you want to find it right away, you can search for it on the LinkedIn as Onchain Web Developers Community. So yeah, with that, thank you very much. Thank you for your time. And now we can start the Q&A session. So I'm looking at a question from Arshad. Arshad is saying that I'm a MERN stacks developer with 3 years of experience. How can I take leverage of Web3 and how it is different than AI pathway? This is a great question, Archit. So essentially, we are looking at AI, we are looking at Gen AI getting mainstream, we are looking at people diving into building tools, AI agents, and different workflows leveraged by AI agents to solve real world problems. And this is like a very, very valid path to forward. But right now, the little understanding I have, and I'm also learning AI, is that the AI path is a lot in like the hands of the bigger companies. So the companies which are making those agents and stuff like that, that's happening on their end. It's changing so rapidly that if you start on the AI pathway right now, you will probably catching up for the next 8 months, and the dust won't be settling until then. And I have been in this path for the past 6 months, and I can assure you that the dust is not nowhere close to settling. At the same time, if you look into learning how you can leverage AI for your development, but then you also develop an understanding of a niche, which is Web3. for your day-to-day works and your workflows. I think that's where the sweet spot is. I think that's where the holy grail is. So you are developing in Web3, you are a Munstacks developer, and you also leverage AI to speed up your overall processing and your completion time. And for how you can uh, the leverage of Web3, I think it's about developing this mindset of starting to learn about stuff. And I think as you learn something, that you start experimenting with stuff, the doors open for you. So right now we are not opening any kind of a pathway that leads to a short job or something. We are focusing solely on the development and focusing on training people, everyone who gets to join our community, to get at a certain level, so they can start working with the people. We have another question from Ahmad Anas. So, should we advance in blockchain driven by curiosity or market demand? And in a fast evolving space, focus on one tech in extreme depth or explore new ones as coming? That's an excellent question, Anas. And since you have been part of this particular industry, you can understand that there are different challenges or caveats to this space. So once you change your career path into Web3, the problems don't vanish. They change, they evolve into different problems. And the problems in Web3 is focusing on like really solid tech and finding what is actually really solid tech. So if you just focus on market demand, then it is very hard to focus on building something, because the crypto market has always been like very volatile, and it may stay like that until we have like so because we have Trump as president. Let's just put it that way. And until we have that, I think we are not going to see a lot of change. But if you focus on building something, and when I talk about building something, I'm not talking about building another technical solution, another DeFi protocol, another DeFi something. I'm actually talking about solving a real world problem. I think those problems will still exist. And this is also true with AI. So if you are learning to leverage AI to build solutions, I have a bad news for you. You are going to get redundant, you are going to get like replaced very fast. The sole purpose of AI is to enable people to just forget about the solution space for a bit and focus more on the problem side of things. So my suggestion to you, Anas, is to focus more on the problem side of things and figure out what kind of problems that real world users face on a day-to-day basis that you can solve through technology, and figure out what tech stacks makes most sense. So we have a question from Bilal. Thank you, Bilal. So the question is, as an engineer, how am I more valuable? Having the ability to work on core protocols, or having the ability to build out Web3 specific backends? I think the most important thing, again, and I'll just piggyback on what I answered to Anas, is to figure out a real world problem and building for that. So if you feel like there's a protocol which is solving a real world problem and you want to be a part of that, I think that's like a great idea. But at the same time, if you feel like there is this gap in Web3 where the backends for Web3 specific problems don't exist, and you want to focus on that, I think it's a great idea. So at the end of the day, I really encourage you to look at the problem side of things and not the solution side of things. Awesome. Do we have any other questions? Okay, so yeah, like I mentioned, we have this closed group on LinkedIn. Where we are going to post about our talks, where we are going to post about certain paths, and start some engagements and activities. And I'll highly encourage you guys to be a part of that group. And you know, yeah, the most important thing that the reason we are doing all of this, like the web lightning talks, the community, and everything, is that a lot of the stuff that we had to go through for our own training for transitioning our engineers from Web 2 domains to Web 3 was through community settings, was through building cohorts where people could come together in a safe space and just ask questions without anyone judging them. So if you go to like a professional person to give an interview or ask them to train you, they are going to charge you some money. What we are doing right now is provide the service for free. So you are doing that by bouncing off ideas from each other, and you are learning together as a community. And we have found that in Tintash to be super helpful, because we have seen how people get in a cohort and they do this and like for like a specific amount of time, and out of the cohort they are like ready to go into production and start working on production level code with like big companies, some of the companies which I mentioned. So yeah, I think this has been an amazing experience talking to you people. In future, I would love to see some more faces, and I really thank you all for joining today's talk. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me at azhar@tintash.com. I'll actually, Bharat can also type that in the chat. Um, we are also going to be active on our LinkedIn group, so we can also get connected there and start the conversation, or keep the conversation going on there. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it.